HD Production Live, here with Chuck Comisky, who is a 3D special effects, visual effects expert. Tell me how you got involved in 3D.
Well, when I was a kid, I used to buy those little anaglyph red and blue comic books, and I thought, well, that's strange. They make 3D, so I got a red and blue pencil, and I started drawing my own. Flash forward to Jaws 3D. I got hired. I had a visual effects company at that time, and got hired by Landsberg Productions to do the visual effects on a thing called Jaws 3D. Not necessarily a high point in my career, but nonetheless it was 3D. And went ahead and I was director of photography on a film for National Aerospace Administration called Mars in 3D, which utilized the real footage that came back from Mars. And then we shot the Viking lander mock-up at Jet Propulsion Laboratory and did things like bring in the sampling arm out into the audience and stuff like that. So then, you know, during all this, I've been doing visual effects supervision. Jim Cameron wanted to do Terminator 2, 3, what became Terminator 2 3D, the theme park attraction at Universal, and he asked me if I would produce it. Digital Domain was going to be the production entity, and so I did produce it, which meant pulling together the crews and getting everything together, doing the schedules and all that, and we shot that, and it got released. A lot of success in Orlando, Florida, and here in Hollywood as well. And let me think. So I did 2 IMAX shows with Jim. One of them I was one of the producers on. It was Ghosts of the Abyss, and then there was another one called Aliens of the Deep. Both these are IMAX 3D shows that Jim directed. He likes water and underwater a lot, and both those had to do with water. And then, you know, Avatar came up, and in between all that, I was doing I freelance, do various visual effects supervision jobs, and since Avatar, visual effects supervisor on a film called Sanctum in Australia, and then Final Destination 5 up in Vancouver, a film in China called Flying Swords over Dragon Inn, I think, or Dragon Gate. And then since Avatar, I've also been hired to teach 3D, particularly on sets and so forth, in Beijing, Hong Kong, Zhuhai, China, India, and so forth.
In layman's terms, can you tell me about the 3D technology that you did in Avatar?
Well, Avatar was an interesting project because obviously 10-foot tall humanoids didn't exist, so Jim couldn't go out and cast actors for it. And the main way that was achieved to create those very realistic looking Na'vi people in Avatar was through a system called performance capture. And the way that works is we had a 35 by 75 foot performance capture stage, in which performers, stunt people and actors, and you may have seen them there in those little black suits with little reflective balls on them at different points in the joints of the wrists, the elbow, hips, and so forth. That captured movement of the stunt people and or the actors as they moved, and that data was translated into the Na'vi skeleton, if you will, that had been set up so that even though the human knees to hips were a different ratio than what the people on Pandora would have been, and their waists were too long and too thin and stuff like that, impossible to just put someone in a suit to do that. What it did do was allow Cameron to direct the actors and the stunt people on the performance capture stage while he was looking at a virtual camera. Well, it was an LED, but that camera was fed with the environment of the planet Pandora, and he could see the representation of the Na'vi characters, so that he could look on his screen and see exactly what the scene was that he was directing, and he just glanced above it and he could direct the actors and the stunt people. So that material then became the basis, and that was in 2D, if you will. That then became the basis after some editing and so forth. The material would come up to a projection room that we had at the studios, which was basically the Howard Hughes hangars, the old ones down in the marina. And we had a projection room about twice as big as this room, and we could play back that material in 2D, and I could set the stereo. And what I mean by setting the stereo is two main things you have to consider with stereo. First of all, if you see things in 3D, it's the way your eyes, your brain processes the data that comes in from two different points of view, your left eye and your right eye. And so you more or less have to duplicate that in the camera or in the capture system that you're doing, so that the wider the separation of the lenses if you were on a set, or virtual lenses if you were doing what we were doing with performance capture, the wider those lenses, the more depth the actual scene would have in it, virtual depth. If the cameras were closer together, you had less depth, and there are reasons for both of those, both on an artistic and a practical reason as well. But in the meantime, so what would happen is the material that Jim had captured on the stage, he would send up to our projection room, the wheels room as we called it, and we would smooth out the moves and then basically set the stereo, which would be to create the left and right eyes from the single eye that he captured, and then set the difference between the virtual lenses. The human eye is like 2.5 inches roughly, and depending on the scale we wanted to set, we might have a 1.5 inch separation between the virtual lenses, or we might have a 2.5 inch separation between them. And we may do dynamic moves. If the shot required starting on a close-up of someone, you might be in fairly tight. The interaxial separation would be pretty small, and then if you opened up to a wider shot, you probably generally would open up the interaxial spatial as well. So we could set key points in a particular scene or a sequence, record those, play them back if we liked them. That then became a template, a stereo template, if you will, that went to the vendors that were doing the heavy lifting on the show. For instance, Weta, who was tasked with creating the complete environment in the jungle and on the planet Pandora. ILM, who was responsible mostly for the battle sequences at the end, and then various other smaller vendors that picked up other sequences that may amount to the prelude to the story, which is on Earth, which was totally captured and was cut out of the film because the film was too. I guess Fox and Cameron decided that the film was too long with all the material, so they made certain cuts to it. And anyways, that became the stereo, and that became the 3D, and that was what I did on it.
Great. And right now you're working on 3D for at-home viewership.
I'm working with an associate named Rory Hennon, and what we are doing is developing an inexpensive and fast, but with some quality ways to be able to convert legacy or archived films and turn those into 3D, primarily for home viewing, but it could work theatrically as well. Films like Indiana Jones, and as everyone's probably aware, Star Wars, which has been remastered or redone, remastered for 3D, has been released in theaters, and there's a slew of good and bad 3D conversions going on. But the good ones are very interesting, and I think it adds a whole new interest. Titanic, I think, is scheduled for April 12th to be released, and that's being converted into 3D. And I think that given the audience that it had and how long it's been since the original was released, I mean, there's an awful lot of people that might like that film that never have really seen it on a big screen, and certainly never have seen it in 3D.
Is there a project that you've worked on that's been your favorite?
Well, from a work standpoint, I would have to say Avatar, both because of I'm a freelancer, the longevity, which was 4 years, and also because, and I've been pretty much exclusively working in 3D since then. There's just a lot less pressure on you when you're doing 3D than when you're supervising visual effects. A lot less, fewer people that you have to answer to, and either your 3D looks good or it doesn't, and you don't worry so much about subjective changes as you might when you're supervising visual effects elements.
Great. Thank you so much, Chuck, and best of luck with all your upcoming 3D ventures.
Well, right now we're developing our conversion process. We're actually in negotiations or bidding process with a major film, which I can't say for the moment, but that's going to be shot in 2D and that's going to be converted into 3D. And various different conversations going on around various different seminars that I get asked to speak to in various places around the world. I guess that's about it.
Okay. And what is the name of the company that you do this work under?
Well, the company that we are in the process of creating, we decided to call Chromium, and the process that we use is called volumetrics with an IX on the end, and all that basically means is that we're adding volume to 2D material.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck, for your time, and best of luck with all this 3D conversion.
You're welcome.
I'm Katie Uhlmann reporting for TTNHD Production Live.